Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Tanya class. We are learning today. We are towards the end of chapter 26. It can be found in your bilingual Tanya on page 113. So in this chapter, which begins a new subject and a new topic, the Alter Rebbe is going to discuss in the next few chapters from 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. He's going to discuss an extremely important issue that without which one cannot approach serving God at all. And that is that by hook or by crook, you must eliminate from yourself any kind of sadness and depression, period. And in these chapters, the Alter Rebbe advises the means by which you can rid yourself of depression, sadness, and unhappiness. Because a fundamental is you have to be happy to serve God. To do anything successful, you have to be happy. Because if you're melancholy and you're down and you're sad, you're heavy, you're lazy, it leads to laziness, it leads to weakness. And let's face it, serving God and navigating the life that the world that we live in, is a battle between good and evil. And you have to always win. The good has to win. And in order to win, you have to be in an upright, in a good mood, in a positive mood. And sadness is a recipe for disaster in that. So what the Alter Rebbe does, he goes through now the different reasons and causes for sadness. And he explains each one individually why there's no real reason to be sad. And he starts with the most common sadness, moves on to what's a little less and less. What is the most common reason why people are sad and depressed? Life is dealing them a different, the life is not treating them well. Sickness, poverty, pain, all sorts of things, loss, all sorts of physical ailments and physical deficiencies that cause one to feel abandoned, alone, sad, and so on. So last week, if you remember, we learned the Alter Rebbe tackled the first one, the first reason, the most common reason why people are sad. And that is because the physical life for them is not going well. Whether it's someone's sick in the hospital, they themselves are sick in the hospital, or because their children are not well, or because they don't have money, their livelihood is not going well, and they can't pay bills. It's all these reasons why we feel abandoned, sad, and so on. So the Rebbe explained that that's not a reason to be sad. It's not a reason to be sad. Now I want to differentiate, and it's important. You have to distinguish between pain and sadness. A person breaks his leg, he's going to have pain. It's going to hurt. A person that's going to have doesn't have money it's painful. It's worrisome a little bit. It's painful. The question is, does that have to lead to sadness? What causes depression, sadness? When you're in pain, you're sad? Is that an automatic? When the person is in pain, he's automatically sad? It depends. Why does pain lead to depression, to sadness?
Faith.
Huh? Well, let's give a few examples. When someone finds out that he has, God forbid, ALS, you never know of it. Or someone finds out that he has an internal illness that, whatever that's going to ruin his life. He's going to be in terrible pain. Right? Now that can depress you. It could lead to depression. It could lead to a deep sadness. What's going on? Why is God doing this to me? Why do I deserve this punishment? Or even if it's not a punishment, whatever, why do I deserve this? That's obvious. That's naturally, a lot of times that's a feeling that sets in when things go bad. But does it have to be that way? Let's give another scenario. You're driving to the airport and you get into a terrible accident. And you break your leg, you break your bones, you break your ribs. And you have to go to the hospital. And you miss your plane. You missed your plane, and that means you missed your vacation or you missed a very important business appointment. Life gets, a disruption of the norm. But then you find out that plane that you were supposed to be on went down, God forbid. Imagine. Went down. Are you sad? Are you still sad? Are you still sad? Do you feel abandoned? On the contrary, you feel, my God, God was right there with me. He saved my life. He saved it through a few broken ribs, but they hurt still. This pain, every time you move, you're going to feel pain, but you're not going to feel sadness. There will not be one drop of sadness in that person's feelings. Right? Obviously. Because you'll thank God for that accident. Oh, you may think to yourself, could have made it, maybe it would be better if he had a police stop me on the way and just give me a ticket, and that would have caused me a half-hour delay, and I'd missed the plane. I didn't have to have broken ribs because of that, right? But you still would say, thinking that, the entire picture, thank God for this. You wouldn't be sad. What the Alter Rebbe is saying, every pain is the same thing. Every pain is good. Some pains you understand right away because you missed a flight and the flight went down. You see right away how good it was. Sometimes we don't see the bigger picture. But know for certain that not only has he not abandoned you, the Alter Rebbe says, he's even gotten closer to you. And we learned this last week, if you remember. This is what I'm just going over a little bit of what we learned last week. Because he explained that the good that comes from a higher level, when it trickles down and manifests itself in this world, it's unable to come down in a normal, positive way where we can receive it. We discussed it. That's what the theme was last week. Or, for example, an operation. An operation hurts. You have gallstones. You have terrible pain. And you got to go in and get them out, right? Or whatever other operation you have. Are you sad that you're having the operation? Are you depressed? You feel abandoned? No, you feel this is going to help me. This is going to restore my health. So you're not sad by it. You're in pain. It hurts. And when it hurts, you scream perhaps. You cry because of the pain. But you're not sad. The Alter Rebbe is saying pain does not equal sadness. On the contrary, pain, in the case of when God, because everything comes from God, he said revealed good comes from one level. Concealed good, the pain which is a concealed good, comes from an even higher level. So don't let that depress you. It's not easy. It's easier said than done, obviously. But that's the premise. That's what Alter Rebbe said. Today, now, in the end of chapter 26, he's going to talk about a different cause for sadness. It's not coming from physical pain or emotional pain because you're having trouble in life or whatever. It comes from a different place. Imagine a person feels sad and depressed over his moral failings. You realize in life, I've been such an evil person. Not evil towards other people. I've been selfish, self-centered. A person sometimes feels depressed by his moral failings. I've sinned so much in my life. I haven't been nice to my wife. I haven't been nice to my neighbors. I haven't been nice to society. I've been self-centered. and you become older, and you realize in your adult life, what's with me? What kind of person am I? And you begin to start feeling depressed about that. How did I allow this to happen to me? How did I become such a rotten person? You feel like you... Now, there you can't say that's also good because it's coming from God. No, my moral failings are not good. My moral failings are really bad, and for that I should be depressed and sad and feel terrible about it. No? When you're having physical pain, the Alter Rebbe explained it's not bad. Don't be depressed over it. It's not an abandonment. But when I have real bad, which is my sins, my moral failings, that is a real reason to be depressed. So the Alter Rebbe says, wait a minute. You shouldn't be depressed over that either. You would expect differently. The Alter Rebbe, the big tzaddik, who's a holy, righteous person, would say to a person who has moral failings, yeah, that's a reason to be, to beat yourself over the head about it.
The psychiatrist out of business.
The Alter Rebbe is the ultimate psychiatrist.
That's true.
He says, don't be depressed over it. Now, this is brilliant what he's going to say here. He says two things. Why is a person depressed over his moral failings? There could be two reasons for it. One says, I failed God. God wants me to live in a certain way, and I completely failed him. I sinned. I wasn't honest. I wasn't honest with him. I didn't do the mitzvahs I was supposed to do. I sinned everywhere, when I was, I didn't control my urges at all. I didn't control my urges. I'm out of control. If it comes from, it can come because it can result of your feeling that you failed God. That's one kind of reaction, one kind of reason. But then there's another reason why you're upset with yourself. How did I? It's not about God so much, it's about me. You feel like, how did I, a good person, from a good family, descend and debase myself like this? It's not so much about God, it's more about you. So the Alter Rebbe is going to say like this. When does this depression hit you? When do you begin to feel these feelings of depression? Let's analyze this a minute.
Later on in life?
No, even if it's before. I'm not talking about when in life. I'm talking about when during the day.
Okay.
He's saying like this. When you're learning Torah and you're doing a mitzvah, you're going and visiting someone in the hospital, paying him, doing the mitzvah of visiting the sick, or you're putting on tefillin, or you're giving charity, or you're in the middle of a seder on Pesach, and suddenly these thoughts come into your head. What kind of a moral failure am I? And so on. And you feel depressed about it. Is that a good time to be depressed over your moral failings? While you're serving God, while you're doing mitzvahs? No. Why? Because when doing mitzvahs, we learned already last week, a person has to be in a good mood, in a happy state when he's serving God. So to feel depressed when you're in the middle of serving God is a bad idea. In the middle of davening, you're starting to feel depressed over your moral failings. Not good. When you daven, you should be happy. When you're serving God, you have to be happy. So that's certainly not a good time to be. Now, let's say you're in the middle of your business, selling a car. Imagine a customer comes in, he's talking to you about this car, that car, and suddenly in the middle you start feeling depressed about your moral failings. Does that make any sense? Maybe that a good time to feel your moral failings? See, the question the Alter Rebbe is going to analyze this in the following way. Where's that feeling coming from? Your good inclination? Your neshama? Your soul? Or is it coming from a self-centered, evil inclination? Our evil inclination is very, very cunning. It's very cunning. I said this, I think, last week. Our evil inclination wants us to be depressed. Because you know what happens when a person is depressed? You can get that person to do any bad thing when you're depressed. The evil inclination's greatest accomplishment is when he gets you depressed. Because once he has you depressed, he can get you to succumb to any temptation. So the evil inclination is constantly looking for you to be depressed. How does he get you to be depressed? When life is going good, it's hard to get a person to be depressed, right? So what does he do? He reminds you, he knocks into your head constantly, you're a bad person. Look at this failing you did, look at that failing you did. What kind of a person are you? And he gets you down, he brings you down. He demoralizes you. That's what he wants to demoralize us. When you're demoralized, you're open game for him. He can get you to do anything bad. So now, if it's in the middle of your business day, imagine you're sitting in your store, or you're treating patients, or whatever else you do for a living, and suddenly in the middle of that day you're starting to feel depressed about your moral failings. Where did that thought come from? Where is that coming from? Your neshama is getting you. Is your neshama reminding you in the middle of your day's work about how you failed God? Is it your neshama? Wait a minute. Let's analyze this. Is it your neshama that's reminding you in the middle of selling cars that you failed God? I'll tell you why not. Why are you depressed? Let's analyze this person who's sad and melancholy over his moral failings towards God. You're really concerned that you failed God. Why are you so concerned that you failed God? Let's understand this. Why are you concerned that you failed God? Because you love God, right? Because you feel an attachment to God. Let's talk about a spouse. Forget God for a minute. Let's talk about our human relationships. When someone was not loyal to his spouse, I don't mean literally he was not loyal, was unfaithful, he cheated God. I'm talking about you were not a good husband, you were not a good wife, you were not a good baby, you didn't help when you should have, and you neglected her, and you abandoned her, and you didn't care about your family, your husband, your wife, your children. Your parents, you neglected them in their old age. Imagine that. And then you feel bad about it, right? Why do you feel bad about it? Because you love them? It can be from two reasons. Either you love them, and how dare I have done that to them, or you love yourself, and you're an upstanding individual, and you know that in the books it says you have to be nice to your parents, and I have not been nice to my parents. It's not about your parents, it's about you. You understand? There's two distinctions here. So if it's about your parents, so when will you start feeling bad about abandoning your parents? Because you love them, right? In other words, you have to start thinking about your parents and your relationship with them and how they're everything to you and you're everything to them, and that this relationship was ruined by you. When do you think? So now back to God. When you start feeling depressed over your moral failings towards God, you failed God. That comes to you in the middle of selling a car? Such a feeling comes to you in the middle of selling a car? That doesn't. Because in order to feel bad about your estrangement from God, you have to think about God. He has to be in the front of your consciousness. You have to feel a certain feeling towards him. And then you can feel bad that you abandoned him, or you neglected him, or you failed him. But suddenly in the middle of selling a car, when you're not even thinking about God, suddenly that enters your mind, how did I fail God? It's not coming from your soul. It's not coming from your neshama. That's not coming from your soul. That's coming from your evil inclination. And this is not about your God, it's not about your parents, it's about you. It's about your ego. How did I, this most important person, fail? That comes from the evil, that comes from a bad place. So don't pay attention to those feelings. It's your Yetzer Hara, it's your evil inclination trying to get a hold of you and bring you down so he can get you to do the worst things ever. So the Alter Rebbe says like this: if it's happening to you in the middle of davening, you are thinking about God. So maybe then those feelings should start hitting you, right? He says in the middle of davening, bad news. You can't be sad when you're davening. Davening has to be from a point of happiness. Any serving, any mitzvah you do has to come from a positive place. You have to be happy when you do mitzvahs. When you're doing business in the middle of the market day, and you're feeling bad that you failed God, that's also not coming from the godly soul. It's not coming from your good side. That's coming from your evil inclination. It's coming from an egotistical place. Because if it was about God, you wouldn't happen in the middle of selling a car. Because you're not even thinking about God then. So the Alter Rebbe says, true, you should feel sometimes bad and sad over your moral failings. But there are very specific times for that. Very, very specific times for that. The Alter Rebbe says that the right time for that is during the midnight prayer. Or during the Shema prayer at night. Before you retire at night, you take stock of your day. Maybe that's a time to feel a little bit sad, to contemplate this for a little bit. And then, what's the next feeling? What happens as a result? You have a broken heart over your failings? Yes, that's okay. At these specific times, once a day. But what's the result?
You'll do better.
You'll do better. It's not only you'll do better. It should lead to new happiness. Why? Because what happens? You feel bad. You start thinking, I failed God. Does God forgive you? Will God forgive you if you feel remorse? Absolutely. What happens when God forgives? So you feel bad. You feel great. You feel happy again. So if that sadness that comes at specific times from the right place, that will lead to only good. That will lead to a redoubled happiness later. So the Alter Rebbe said, don't let these feelings of sadness interrupt your day at all. Not during davening, not during the time you're doing mitzvahs, even not during the time you're doing business. There are specific times where you sit down and you contemplate. Who am I? What's with me? How am I doing in my relationship with God? And then you can have. It's not a bad idea to take a few minutes to think about the fact that you failed and correct it. And what happens? You'll feel bad, and that will break the spirit of unholiness within you, and then you'll be forgiven. You'll start being happy again. So it's a very momentary thing. The Alter Rebbe said that's a healthy sadness, once a day. But if you're going around all day long thinking about this, that's coming from a very bad place. Let's see in the Alter Rebbe's words. As for sad, it's on page 113, on the bottom, in the right column, towards the bottom, where that circle is. As for the sadness which is connected with heavenly matters, moral failings, it's not about physical ailments and things, coming from a more moral place, your moral failings. One must seek ways and means of freeing oneself from it. You got to free yourself from that sadness. To say nothing of the time of divine service, when one must serve God with gladness and a joyful heart. So when you're davening and you're learning and you're doing mitzvahs, for sure you shouldn't be upset, because then you have to have a joyful heart. But even if he is a man of commerce and worldly affairs, should there enter into him any melancholy or anxiety about heavenly matters, meaning his moral failings, during the time of his business affairs, it is clearly a machination of evil impulse in order to lure him afterwards to lust, God forbid, as is known. For were it not so, if it's not, in other words, were it not so that it comes from the evil impulse, from where would a genuine sadness, which is one that is derived from love or fear of God, come to him in the midst of his business affairs? He's not even thinking about God then. The sadness that comes from being separated estranged from God has to come as a result of your closeness to God. If if you haven't thought about him in who knows how long, where you're suddenly feeling bad that you're estranged from him. In the middle of business, you're not thinking about God. Then probably you shouldn't. You should be thinking about the customer in front of you. So a feeling of melancholy over your moral failings, you failed God in the middle of a commerce day, is not coming from a good place. Thus, whether the melancholy encroaches on him during divine service and study or prayer, or not during divine service, he should tell himself that now is not the time for genuine anxiety. Not even for worry over serious transgressions, God forbid. Some people have real reason to be upset about their behavior. Some of us have really transgressed. But those 2 times are not the time for those feelings. When you're serving God, for sure not, and when you're doing business, also not. Because when you're doing business, there's no... in other words, when you're doing business, you're not thinking about God. You're certainly not thinking about your love for God. And therefore, suddenly you're feeling terrible about your separation from God. It ain't coming from the neshama. It's coming from the evil impulse. It's to lure you in and get you down. For this, one needs appointed times and a propitious occasion, which with calmness of mind, to reflect on the greatness of God against whom one has sinned, so that thereby one's heart may truly be rent and with sincere contrition. To really feel bad that you became separate from God through sin, you have to sit down and think about how great God is and how terrible it is to be separate from Him. No? And that's not happening during your business day. It is explained elsewhere when this time should be, and it is there explained also that as soon as his heart has been broken during these specific occasions, he should forthwith completely remove the sorrow from his heart and believe with a perfect faith that God has removed his sin in his abundant forgiveness. This is the true joy in God which comes after the remorse as mentioned above. So how long of a time period does one feel remorse even during those propitious times? Not very long. Because if it's sincere, what happened?
I'm just thinking of your example, a car salesman.
Yeah.
Car salesman at the time. Car salesmen have a reputation. If you're selling someone a car and it's a little old lady, you tell her,
I'm talking about an honest
this is going to last.
How much can I get out of her?
Yeah, so
Maybe that's
I think that is a good time to have a little moral conscience.
A moral conscience you have to have all the time. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about when you are feeling sad over your failings, over the past failings.
Well,
obviously, right now you have to be.
Many people
obviously.
Past, and I'm gonna now be honest. And
Okay, that's a very good feeling. You have to be honest. You have to think about honesty. No question about that.
I think a very good example is if a mother is depressed when her job is to take care of her children, and she lets that affect her.
That's exactly the same thing. So imagine while you're serving your children, you're feeling bad that you neglected your children. How good are you going to be able to serve your children at that time with such feeling? It's the same thing with God. While you're doing a mitzvah and you're serving God, don't think about the fact that you ruined it, that you messed up yesterday. Because you're not going to be able to serve Him properly. You have to be happy when you serve. You have to be excited when you serve. It's that simple.
Truly? Oh, I apologize. I didn't know.
I gave 2 examples, a doctor and a car salesman.
I apologize. They have a reputation. Sorry.
Trust me, I know.
Guilty conscience.
I know.
It's a very what you're talking about is a different thing. You're talking about a person has to be a moral individual. When you're doing a transaction, yeah, that's a different thing. That's not about yesterday's sins. That's about today's moral. I have to be a mensch. I have to be not a thief. I have to be honest.
Yeah.
You always have to have that in your mind. But we're talking about
Your job.
Sadness over the past failings. That's what we're talking about.
Your job.
In chapter 27, hold on, in chapter 27, he's going to talk about a different type of sadness, which we'll get into momentarily. A sadness over present failings, which we'll discuss in a minute. Let me just, first of all, let's make your point.
Your job to provide for your family, whether it's a mother for her children or a father working, is to provide and do the best job you can, and you have to be positive when you're doing it.
100, that's exactly what he's saying.
If you're being brought down by the Yitzhak,
right,
then you're letting
in other words, if it's coming during those times, it's absolutely from the Yetzer Hara. It's not from your Yetzer Tov.
Yeah.
It's not from your good inclination. Your good inclination would not try to get you down when you're serving God, and when you do, when you're doing your job. The Yetzer Tov. In other words, sadness over a separation from God can only come as a result of your thinking about God. You're not thinking about God when you're doing business. So it's not coming from that place. It must be coming from somewhere else. It's coming from the evil inclination, trying to get you down by every means possible. That's it.
And it's a mitzvah to provide for your family. It's a mitzvah to take care of your family. And you can't be brought down.
Even if it's not. I'm saying even if it's not. You're right. You're probably right about that. Because even serving, it can also be part of serving God in a way. But the Alter Rebbe is saying, even if it's not a mitzvah in the Torah to go sell cars, or to sell whatever, furniture, whatever it is you sell. So maybe all he's saying is maybe then is a good time to allow these feelings to enter. So that's not a time that these feelings would enter from a good place. Because you're not thinking about God during that time. But now the Alter Rebbe ended the chapter saying that he has to be right away happy again, knowing that God will forgive him. How do we know that God is forgiving? Well, first time, imagine I sinned against someone. I offended someone. Okay, I come over and I ask forgiveness. First time he'll forgive. A person can make a mistake. What about a second time? Okay, maybe you'll allow him to get away a second time and you'll, sincere remorse, you'll forgive. But 10 times? You say, enough, goodbye. Leave me alone. I don't want to have anything to do with you. You can't come to me over and over and over and sin against me and offend me and keep asking forgiveness. There's a limit. So how many times did we sin against God? I can't even count. So how do you know that God is forgiven? Look at the Alter Rebbe's words. He should forthwith completely remove the sorrow from his heart and believe with a perfect faith that God has removed his sin in his abundant forgiveness. Are you sure that God forgives you over and over? How many times could he forgive for the same sin? Maybe he's tired of you asking forgiveness. You're not sincere. You don't mean it. And even if you do mean it, genukshen, I don't. But here's the difference between us and God. We're limited. Everything about us is limited. Our forgiveness is limited. Our lifespans are limited. Our feelings are limited. And therefore our forgiveness is limited. You can't keep doing the same thing to me over and over and expect me to forgive over and over and over. But God is unlimited. Nothing about him is limited. So the millionth time you ask him forgiveness is just like the first. There's no end to his forgiveness. So every time, if you're sincere, obviously if you're not sincere, you're not asking for forgiveness. But if you are sincere, he's going to forgive. He's not plagued by the limitless, by the limited, by being finite. He's infinite. And as such, every one of his emotions are infinite. So he can forgive an infinite amount of times. And that's why Yom Kippur makes sense. And every day we ask God for forgiveness during our prayer. Even though we're back at it, you were just here yesterday and the day before and the day before. How many times could you expect me to forgive you? I can expect you to forgive me an infinite amount of times. And I can have faith that he will. And he will. Because he is infinite. And because of that, he will forgive infinitely. An infinite amount of times. In chapter 27, the Alter Rebbe discusses another matter. Along the same lines. A third reason why a person would be depressed. Let's put it this way. Do you feel yourself as a good moral person? I'd say mostly, yeah. I mean, we're decent people. Imagine you don't sin. God forgave you of your sins. You decide, I'm not doing that again. But tomorrow morning you have the urge again. Yeah, the urge comes back to you, right? You're right back at it. Let's take the car salesman that you mentioned. Yeah? And he has to remind himself, you have to be moral. And he sees an little old lady, as you said, coming in, and drove in with a very expensive car, and carrying a Louis Vuitton, bag. And it's clear that, if you have the right words and you can sell her the Brooklyn Bridge. And sell a car that's worth $20,000 for $40,000. You have an urge, you have a temptation to do that. Some do. You can make an extra few dollars over an innocent woman that doesn't know what's happening. You have to remind yourself, that's not right. You're not allowed to do that. Imagine every day he has the urge to cheat these people. Could that bring you down? Even if he doesn't. Even if he overcomes the urge and he says, you know what, I'm a moral person. I'm going to sell it to her for $20,000. That's what it's worth. I'm not going to take advantage. But imagine every day he's in that car sales shop, and every day people come in, and every day he has an urge to be dishonest. He overcomes it every time, but he has the urge. How demoralizing is that? You would think, okay, I have the urge today, I'll work on myself, I will graduate, I will overcome the urge, and I won't have these urges anymore. I'll become a better person internally. You remember what Alter Rebbe said in the earlier chapters? The difference between a tzaddik, a Beinoni, and a Rasha, the righteous, the intermediary person, and the wicked person, the sinful person. What's the difference? Let's remind you. The sinful person, let's start with the tzaddik. The righteous person is someone that not only he never sins, sin disgusts him. He doesn't even have an urge to sin. He hates sin. How does he hate sin so much? How does he get to that point where you hate sin? You have no urge for it at all. Because his love for God is incredible. His love of God is magnificent, is on a very, very high level. Therefore, you can't see yourself doing anything. You don't even have an urge to do anything against that which I love so much. Imagine it with your own family. You love your spouse. So the more you love them, the less you have an urge to do anything that they don't like. Sometimes you get to the point where it disgusts you to do something that they don't like. It's abhorrent to you. That's the tzaddik. He not only doesn't sin, whether through thought or speech or action, but he even abhors it. He has no urge for it. Because his love for God is perfect. Then you have the intermediary person. In behavior, in action, thought, speech, and action, he's perfect. He'll never sin. But his inner soul is not so clean yet. He still feels a temptation to sin. And he overcomes it every time. He overcomes. He's battling and he overcomes. Then you have the sinful person who not only he has a temptation for sin, he succumbs to it. He sins in action. Or in thought, or in speech, whatever. So Alter Rebbe now is discussing the Beinoni in this chapter. The middle person. Here's a person that serves God he's perfect in the service of God. He never sins. He never has a negative thought. He never entertains a negative thought. He never speaks bad words. And he certainly never does anything wrong. So he'll never cheat a little old lady. He'll never be dishonest to anyone. He'll never say an untruth out of his mouth. He'll never even think an unhealthy thought.
Is he alive?
He's alive. Yeah. Can't think. You can't even imagine such a person. I met such people. I really mean that. I met they're not. They're far. They're not very common. To be very honest, there's a few of them There's very few people that literally never sin. But they do. I saw such a person.
But does not the Beinoni have urges to sin, but just doesn't do it?
He has an urge, yeah, that's the point. I said, the Beinoni is the person that does have temptation to sin.
But you say he never has a negative thought.
No, that's the tzaddik. Oh, you mean that he never entertains, he never lets it linger. He never lets it linger. He never lets it linger. I'm going to explain it in a minute.
Okay.
Thoughts go into his head, but he never lets them stay there. He throws them right out. The tzaddik, the thoughts never even come into his head. It abhors him. Let me give you an example of where you're a tzaddik. There are certain areas where you're a tzaddik. For example, does it ever occur to you when you see blood, I'd love to drink a cup of that?
What?
I'd love to drink a cup of that. Do you?
Yeah.
It doesn't even enter your head. It disgusts you. That's how the tzaddik feels with every sin. Because it's a sin to drink blood. You know that, right?
But
It's one of the Torah's prohibitions. So you're a tzaddik when it comes to that one sin. A tzaddik is the real righteous individual is like that with every sin. Imagine, it's not only that he doesn't do it, it disgusts him. The whole idea of lying is abhorrent to him. That's a tzaddik. There's not many tzaddikim in this world.
This example is, forget people who love God or even know God. Drinking a cup of blood would probably be aesthetically repugnant to almost everybody.
I agree with you.
Without thinking about whether it's a sin or not.
I agree
So
with
you've
you.
never learned Torah.
You're right.
You wouldn't
You're right.
drink it anyway.
This is true. Yeah. A tzaddik, so you're saying you don't have to love God to be abhorred by a cup of blood.
Right.
Right. But you do have to love God that every single sin should be disgusting to you. That's the tzaddik. The tzaddik is someone whose love of Hashem is absolutely perfect. Just to cite an example. Are you mortified every time someone falls on his knee and scratches his knee?
No.
No. But when your child falls on his knee and scratches his knee, you run over and what can I do? And
Yeah.
Why is that? Because you love him.
Child, yeah.
Because you love him. The more you love someone, the more you're abhorred by anything that is against that interferes with that person, with that person's wants and life and so on. So it's with Hashem the same. The more you love Hashem, the more you're going to be disgusted by anything that he doesn't like. So now let's take the middle person. The middle person is someone that doesn't abhor sin. In fact, he finds it delicious. To him, a sin could be very tempting. Could be very tempting. Right? But he won't do it. He's disciplined enough not to do it. He loves God enough not to ever violate his will. But he does have the temptation. So now imagine such a person. This is the ultimate dichotomy. This is the ultimate, if you think about it, I would say this is the most pitiful person. He never sins, and he's bogged down by sin every single day of his life. Can you imagine how frustrating that is? He's in a constant battle. He always wins the battle, but he never graduates. Imagine sending in your troops to fight a war that has no end to it. Imagine they go into a war knowing that there's no end to this war. Can that depress you? Could that depress you?
Sure.
It sure can. It's one thing if you tell me, listen, today you're battling with sin, but if you discipline yourself and you hold yourself back and you do the right thing, in 2 years you won't battle with sin anymore. You'll get over it. That's not what happens. The battle between good and evil is as long as life itself. So imagine this Beinoni. He's battling it through life, day in and day out, hour in and hour out, minute in, minute out. Always is disciplined enough to win the battle, but he always has to be in a battle. It's a terrible place to be, if you think about it. It's the most frustrating place to be. Why'd God put me in this situation? I can never, ever win this. When you're davening, imagine, the guy is davening sincerely. He's in a very good place. Boom. Negative thoughts, even carnal thoughts can enter your mind.
Yeah.
And he has to shoot it out. He has to throw it out of his head. 10 minutes later, again, something else. You hate this person, you dislike that. All kinds of thoughts come into your head. And you have to constantly throw them out and battle your life, battle your way through life, day in and day out. It's the most depressing thing ever. That could depress you, knowing that you can never win this battle. So in chapter 27, the Alter Rebbe is going to say that should not depress you one bit. Let's see it in his words. You ready? Chapter 27. Before we start it in his words, let me give you a glimpse of what he's going to say. He's going to say even more. Not only it shouldn't depress you, it should make you happy. It should make you happy. Why? Here's why. This Bain in you, who's a person who's definitely taken God very serious. He never sins. This is a man that takes God very serious. You can say he loves God very, very much. Perhaps not like the tzaddik, the righteous person, but he has a very serious love and attraction to God. To the point where he's disciplined 24 hours a day never to do anything wrong. That's pretty good. So he's always looking for an opportunity to do a mitzvah, undoubtedly, right? This is a person that a mitzvah means much to him. So let's analyze this guy. He's davening, yeah? Or learning or going about his life. And suddenly a carnal thought enters his mind. What does he have to do? Shoot it right out, right? Push it away, push it out of his mind. Don't let it linger there, because if it lingers, that's a sin already. Has he just done a mitzvah? Has he done a mitzvah by throwing out that thought? He absolutely did. It's in the Shema every day. You say it every day in the Shema. In the third portion of the Shema.
Where precisely?
Well, we'll read it in a minute.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. This goes back to the very beginning, when you emphasize going to work, being happy or not being happy. I could feel not being happy, but I don't know what happy is. What is happy? When I'm going to work, I'm neither happy nor unhappy. I'm just going along.
No, there's different levels of happiness, obviously. When someone wins $1 million, do you feel happy? If you won a lottery, of $1 million, would you feel happy?
No.
No?
No? Most people would.
Oh, I wouldn't.
Why not?
I don't know why. I just wouldn't. It's not that relevant.
How about when you were 40? How about when you were 40 and you won a lottery for $5 million? I think you'd be happy.
You must think I'm crazy, you know.
No, I don't. When money doesn't mean much to you anymore, so it doesn't make a difference to you.
And you didn't have to work anymore when you were 40. You wouldn't be happy. From now on, you can do whatever you wanted every day.
Is happy being smiling?
No, an inner feeling of happiness.
Is happy feeling like, a joke?
No.
Oh, it isn't.
No, happy is not a joke. No, that's entertainment.
Is it contentment?
It's more related to contentment. You see, this fun, you're having fun, that's not necessarily happiness. When a drug addict takes a joint, he's having fun. He's not happy. That's not happiness. That's fun. Fun and happiness are not to be confused. When you go to a movie,
I just find it very hard to define what sadness.
We all know what
Pro.
sadness is.
I'm
Yeah.
pro, okay? I recognize it in a second. But happiness,
You had a lot of moments of happiness in your life. You definitely must have had. When
but what is that? Getting married?
yes,
Were you happy
Yeah.
with
yes.
that?
First of all, yes. That's a good moment. That's a happy moment.
It's hard for me to explain.
I don't think it's so complicated to understand what happiness
Well,
is.
in general.
This Friday there was
seriously-
a bris. You were at the bris?
No,
No.
okay, excuse me. There's an expression in the service, Marty would know. When you don't know what's going on, you just say it's above my pay grade. Okay?
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
And basically, I'm sorry to say that what we're doing now, is above my pay grade. In other words, I'm listening to you. Does that make sense to you at all?
Sure it does.
And I find some things that I don't want to say because I disagree with them, you know?
Okay.
When you were in the service, when you were 20 years old in Korea, were you happy?
Tell me that's one of your happiest times.
Tell me the
Yeah,
truth.
okay,
You were
Some of your
happy,
you
Murray,
said-
I was happy.
Yes.
Were you happy? There you go.
yes,
with
That's
the
it.
night, with the nightclub.
Yeah,
You
running
were
the
happy.
nightclub.
okay.
What could be better?
He's right there,
Sure.
at that point.
There are happy times.
Maybe there weren't too
There are
many
happy times in our
maybe-
life.
Right, maybe there weren't too many times, but at that point, for that period of time, yes.
I think you're underestimating your happiness. You had a lot of wonderful years. You came home and everyone was healthy. Your wife was healthy in the good years. You were healthy. You provided well. You were happy. That doesn't bring your feeling of happiness. Then there's, of course, moments in life that are extraordinarily happy. You said before when you're under your chuppah, when you're getting married, or whatever, a person marries off a child, or you buy a new house. Some people feel very happy when they succeed, they've reached a milestone. Those are things. What you know what happiness is? Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Even less, when you
Specific
graduated high school, you weren't happy to be finished?
I was.
Not really, I had to go to work in my father's.
I think most people would be happy if they won a lottery. They'd be very happy if they won a lottery.
He had to go to work at his father's store.
Unless you win $1 million and you say, it should have been $5 million.
Okay, but you're
then
still,
the
you
type
know,
of person
but you're still
that-
happy that you won $1 million. Most people are happy when they win $1 million.
Never satisfied.
Can win 100 million. No, if I would have done this, I would have won on 200.
Yeah, so,
So, but where were we? We were talking about.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm just trying to remember.
No, I get what you're saying. There are things.
Sure.
Maybe it's the state I'm in. But what Marty brought out and things like
Yeah,
that
100%.
are true.
Yeah, definitely, they're true. So here's a person that takes God very serious, or takes his family very serious. Let's give you an example, a mother. She has 3 children. And every morning she wakes up, and she's not in the mood of getting out of bed. And she has these, maybe, the kids will take care of themselves, they'll make their own breakfast, knowing full well that kids cannot make their own breakfast when they're 5 years old. But she's lazy. And she doesn't feel, for whatever reason, enough of an excitement to jump out of bed and do what you have to do for your children, for your little kids. They're innocent. But she gets up anyway, because I'm a mother. I have to do what I have to do, right? Next morning, the same struggle. The morning after, the same struggle. You've realized I'm not making progress in my inner core as a person, as a mother. I'm not making progress. What's wrong with me? There's something wrong with me. I'm a rotten person. even though she never fails her children. Or the other way around. A child has an elderly parent, and they keep they every day it's another struggle. Should I go visit them? Should I go call them? Should I do this? Should I bring them that? And they have no mood for it. They have to. I'm so busy, and I have this, and I have to take my kids to sport, to after school program. I don't have time for my parents. But after all, the whole calculations is that. But it is my parents. They get into their car and they pay a visit. Next day, the same struggle. You say to yourself, what is wrong with me? There's something wrong with my character. There's something not right with me. I don't have a natural feeling for my family members. My mother. She cared for me. She took care of me. She cradled me. She did everything for me. Why am I not there for her? Why don't I want to be there for her? So even at the end of the day, you are there for your mother, but I don't have that feeling for her. Every day it's a new struggle to get into the car and pay her a visit, or every week, or whatever it is that you have to do. So that could be very demoralizing. That means you look in the mirror and you look at yourself and say, I'm a rotten person. There's something deeply wrong with me. Or let's say a spouse. Imagine a person struggles every single day to remain faithful to his spouse. At the end of the day, he remains faithful, or she remains faithful. But every day it's a new struggle. You say to yourself, what kind of spouse am I? What's wrong with me? Even though I never gave in, I never succumbed to the temptation, but why am I having these temptations? It's my father, it's my wife, it's my husband. What's wrong with me? How could you look in the mirror, you say, who am I? What's wrong with me? What kind of a person am I? That's demoralizing. The Beinoni feels that way every day of his life. He feels that way. You think it's a joke, but now let's talk about God. Let's talk about God, which makes it a little harder for us to relate to, but we'll try our best. We have a feeling towards God, otherwise we wouldn't be here. Every one of us has some kind of a responsibility towards our God. The Beinoni feels God all the time. He really does. He's committed full time. Well, let's not talk about the Beinoni. Let's talk about us. Let's talk about us. We're not Beinonis over here, right? Far from it. Is it a sin towards your spouse to think negative thoughts of unfaithfulness? Sure it is, right? It's horrible. Even though you never act on it. Or you never even say anything. Or even think it. The minute it enters your mind, you shoot it right out. But why is it entering my mind? Why am I not naturally loyal to, naturally totally devoted to my spouse? I shouldn't even have to deal with that matter. But I have to deal with it. That's very frustrating. As a person, as a human being, as a husband, as a wife, you become very frustrated with this. That means I don't love him enough, I don't love her enough. What's wrong? Or the example of the mother towards her kids. These are real issues, right? We don't have this problem perhaps. Because we're more healthy than that. But imagine someone did struggle with this. She's struggling every day to get out of bed for her kids. She gets out at the end. She gets up. But it's a struggle every day. Imagine a husband, he's struggling every day with faithfulness. He's always faithful, he remains faithful, but he struggles. You say to yourself, something wrong with me. What am I missing? This is how the Beinoni feels towards God. He loves Hashem so much that he'll never ever violate anything that God doesn't want. He'll do every mitzvah God tells him to do. But his inner core is still missing. He says, what God finds disgusting, I find delicious. What God finds abhorrent, I find delicious. Imagine how far am I from God? Imagine with your spouse, everything she dislikes, you like. Imagine that. Everything your wife likes, or a lot of things she dislikes, you like. Even though if you don't like it, I won't do it. But you still like it. You still would like to do it. Not knowing that she doesn't like it, you won't do it. But knowing that, but that's not, a good husband, a good wife, would like to know that they're so in touch with their spouse's feelings and inner self that what she eventually you would like to know that what she doesn't like, hopefully I don't like anymore. And we think alike and we feel alike. Then you know you really won. You become, you've reached a level of a relationship that is really exemplary. But imagine, you get married, and 20 years later, you still love everything she doesn't like. I'm not talking about doing, I'm talking about loving, attraction. You're attracted to everything that she finds abhorrent. Could you imagine that? Isn't that terrible? Wouldn't that be terrible to you? As a husband, as a wife, wouldn't you feel, there's something wrong with me? I need a doctor, I need a shrink, I need a counselor, I need something. I need a new lesson on what marriage is all about, right? You would think that. The Beinoni feels this. The Beinoni is tempted to things that God hates. God sees sin as abhorrent. And he doesn't. He sees it as delicious. Even though he'll never do it, because he knows God doesn't want him to do it. He's faithful to God. But why is my heart not faithful to God? Now, for someone that takes God very serious, this could demoralize him. This could be very, very frustrating to him. And it can make him sad. Just like it would make you sad if you had your wife, if you were so far from your wife on an internal level, like I described before. Or your husband. So Alter Rebbe says that shouldn't bother you. On the contrary, it should make you happy. When it comes to God. Let's see it in the Alter Rebbe's words for 5 minutes and we'll finish. Should the sadness, chapter 27, should the sadness, however, not come from worry over sin, but from evil thoughts and desires that enter his mind. In other words, you're not sinning. Now we're talking about a Beinoni that doesn't sin, but it's thoughts that go into his mind. He has the thought for sin. If they enter not during divine service, but while he is occupied with his own affairs and with mundane matters and the like, he should on the contrary be happy in his portion. Why? In that though they enter his mind, he averts his mind from them in order to fulfill the mitzvah, the injunction, that you seek not after your own heart and your own eyes, after which you go astray. That's a mitzvah. If you have a negative thought that entered your mind, you saw something that's not proper, and you turned away from it, you just fulfilled the mitzvah. So when a Beinoni and an evil thought goes into his head, and he throws it right out, he has fulfilled the mitzvah. A tzaddik never fulfills that mitzvah. A tzaddik never fulfills that mitzvah. Because it never enters his mind. So you can never throw it out of his mind. So the Beinoni should be thankful to God. You got every 10 minutes, you have another opportunity to do a mitzvah.
It's true.
It's true, really, if you think about it. Because, again, this is a Beinoni. You have to understand who we're talking about. This is a person who Hashem is the most important thing in his life. He never sins. He does everything that Hashem wants. Obviously, this is a person to whom Hashem is extremely important. So mitzvahs are to him a commodity. He have that rather than anything else in life. And a God provides him with an opportunity to do a mitzvah every 5 minutes. Imagine that. You're happy or you're sad? The verse did not speak of the righteous. This verse is not talking about the righteous. The righteous don't have an opportunity to do this mitzvah. to refer to them as going astray. Tzaddikim don't go astray. God forbid. But the Beinin, the intermediaries, like him, in whose mind do enter erotic thoughts, whether of an innocent nature and so on or not. When he averts his mind from them, he is fulfilling this injunction. Indeed, the rabbis of blessed memory have said,